What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody's doing well out there. Welcome to Week 13 Fantasy Football, talking about them ball catchers today. That's right, wide receivers. And I'm sorry there was no funny intro, but there is so much information that we're trying to get out so quickly this week with all the Thursday games there on Thanksgiving that trying to just get it out here to you as quick as we possibly can. So that's why there is no intro. Please forgive the lack of funniness at the start of this one. But hey, make sure you all out there have a great Thanksgiving with your families, however you're spending it. Make sure that you know that we are very thankful for you guys here over at Headliner Nation, and we could not be here without you all. So now, before we get into Week 13, let's see how we did in Week 12 for the wide receiver position. Pretty solid week for Week 12 wide receivers. Had a total of 58 players that we gave a start or sit designation to. Out of those 58 players, 36 of them were correct for an accuracy percentage of 62%. Some of our biggest hits: Jarvis Landry of the Cleveland Browns, Allen Robinson. He surprised a lot of people last week. We had him as a start. James Washington, yeah, it may have all come on one big play, but we'll take it. Amari Cooper, had him listed as a sit. A lot of people kind of pushed back to that, but he went out there, got himself a goose egg. And then DJ Moore, huge week for DJ Moore. Some of the misses: A.J. Brown, Tennessee Titans. I mean, yeah, he's somewhat boom or bust, but he's kind of one of those guys that boomed in Week 12. We missed it. Will Fuller, it was unclear coming into the week whether he was going to play or not. Not only did he play, dude balled. Tyler Boyd was a miss for us. He's somebody who's been inconsistent here middle half of the season. Cole Beasley went out and had a solid day. And then Robbie Anderson had himself a typical Robbie Anderson boom type of day also. Not something you can count on weekly, but it happened in Week 12 and we missed it. So now we're heading in to Week 13. And once again, don't get too caught up with what column these guys are in. Remember, we're trying to chase these point totals, but a lot really depends on your league, what lineup you already have, some of the stuff that you already know that's in your lineup. You can take some calculated risk at times, but just not too much of it. And that's what we're going to be covering here for Week 13 Fantasy Football wide receivers, going through all the matchups right now. All right, first game up on Thursday, Turkey Day, Thanksgiving. Going to be the Chicago Bears and Detroit Lions. Now, first we lose Matthew Stafford, which was bad enough for the wide receiving group of the Detroit Lions. But then Jeff Driscoll comes in and doesn't do half bad, but now he's dealing with a hamstring injury, and there's a chance that we get to see David Blau. I mean, yay? No, we're not that excited about it. I mean, we're talking about a rookie quarterback out of Purdue making his first NFL start, going against the Chicago Bears in a solid secondary. I mean, this is definitely one of those tough matchups that has to limit the upside of Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones quite a bit. Right now, the Chicago Bears, they're number 2 in the NFL against opposing wide receivers, allowing only 15.9 fantasy points per game. Both of these wide receivers are going to be very big play touchdown dependent. There is huge risk with these guys with David Blau under center. Personally, I would like to avoid them if you have better options. There's a chance that they could go off, but there's a lot of risk there also. Not sure I want to take that here in Week 13. But there's a little bit of risk on the Chicago Bears side of things too. What do we do with Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller? We already know there's not going to be Taylor Gabriel. He's already been ruled out this week. So that means there's a little bit of added volume going the way of Robinson and Miller this week. Now, more than likely, Darius Slay will be on Allen Robinson. And Slay has only allowed over 10 fantasy points one time all year long. That was back in Week 2 to Keenan Allen. In Week 10, these teams just played each other. Darius Slay shadowed Allen Robinson 90% of the time, at least 90% of his snaps, and he only allowed 2 catches for 46 yards. Plus, you add in the fact that there's some erratic play at times from Mitch Trubisky. That adds risk to Allen Robinson. With no Taylor Gabriel, though, that added volume, hopefully they can move Allen Robinson around the field to try to get him away from Darius Slay at times and open up enough for him to at least be a solid flex play if you're looking for it here in Week 13. But now, let's talk about Anthony Miller for a second. You see him in the start column with a couple stars there saying he is a deep sleeper. By no means at all am I calling him a must start. However, the stars are kind of aligning for this to kind of be a solid Anthony Miller type of week. I mean, listen to this. Over the past 2 games, he's had 20 targets, 12 receptions, and 131 yards. Now with no Taylor Gabriel, we already talked about that added volume. And listen to this tweet that I put up on Twitter, and I'll put up here on the screen. I did this today. He's going to be shadowed by the slot defensive back of the Detroit Lions, Justin Coleman. And over his last 7 games, Coleman has allowed 41 receptions, 575 yards, including these type of numbers to slot receivers. On average, the past 2 games, we've seen Anthony Miller in the slot 63% of the time. Some big games that Justin Coleman's given up here recently. Darius Shepard, 7 catches for 103. Stephon Diggs, 6 for 101. Golden Tate, 8 for 85. And Randall Cobb's 9 for 167. Yeah, those are charged to Justin Coleman. That's the matchup that Anthony Miller sees this week. There's a chance. If you're in a deeper league and you're looking for a Hail Mary flex play, Anthony Miller may be your guy here in Week 13. Midday Thanksgiving, here's our matchup with the Buffalo Bills, Dallas Cowboys. And I know where your eyes just gravitated to, but focus. Just stay with me here for a second. It's another tough matchup for Amari Cooper, right? And he's coming off back-to-back stinkers, if that's what you want to call them. In fact, these last 2 games combined, 10 targets, 3 receptions, 38 yards is it. And I know he hasn't been 100% healthy. He is now, it sounds like. But he's going to be matched up with Tre'Davious White, who's only allowed 1 game all season long with at least 10 fantasy points. And Buffalo as a whole is a pretty strong secondary. They only allow 16.4 fantasy points total to NFL wide receivers. That's number 3 in the NFL. But they're going to be playing at home, and that helps. Cooper has had 4 games this year where he scored at least 20 fantasy points. All 4 of those games were at home in Dallas. Now, Gallup, to me, is a little bit safer, a little bit more intriguing in my opinion. He'll draw the coverage of defensive back Levi Wallace, who's played well, but he hasn't really faced a lot of talented wide receivers here as of late. The most comparable that I could find to Michael Gallup is Jarvis Landry, who he just faced in Week 10. That's when Jarvis Landry had 9 catches for 92 yards and a touchdown against him. I can see Dallas attacking on the ground with not only Zeke Elliott, but then through the air with Michael Gallup, and also Randall Cobb is another name that's eating into the typical volume that goes towards Amari Cooper. He's another one of these reasons for Cooper's decline. Cobb's had 30 targets over the last 4 games. I mean, that's what kind of makes Cooper a little bit more risky. He's got the bad matchup. He's losing some volume here and there. The guy is an elite level wide receiver. I'm not taking anything away from him. I just don't like the matchup. A lot of risk here. Now, does that mean that I want to throw in Randall Cobb over Amari Cooper? I think he's safer. It really depends how much risk is already in your lineup, though. If you have a solid lineup and you have room for some risk, that's when you look towards Amari Cooper. If you already have a lot of risk, maybe Randall Cobb's a little bit safer. But the same can kind of be said on the other side of the football for the Buffalo Bills. I mean, John Brown's really benefited from some solid matchups, some really good matchups here the past few weeks. And he's done just enough in the tough matchups to still be fantasy safe, fantasy viable. In fact, he's had at least 8 fantasy points and half-point PPR scoring every single game this season. But is this a Cole Beasley revenge game going back to Dallas, the team that he came from? Is he going to go back there? Are they going to feature him a little bit more? Maybe look for him, in the red zone a little bit more. Try to get a touchdown or 2 to rub it into his former team. That's entirely possible. He's had 19 targets over his last 3 games and has 4 touchdowns out of his last 6 games. The guy's involved. He just is not putting up solid, huge numbers consistently. It could be this week. We may be looking for an outbreak of the Beazles if you're in a deep league looking for a flex play. The Thanksgiving nightcap, that time of the day where everybody's pretty much passed out from too much turkey. That's where we're going to be watching the Saints and the Falcons, and the biggest question here is really Julio Jones. How limited is he? Does he even play? Does Marshawn Lattimore return? There's a chance that that happens also. Regardless, I think Calvin Ridley's in line for a few more targets, kind of like we've seen the past couple weeks. He's had big games back-to-back weeks. And this is a possible shootout with the New Orleans Saints. Both of these defenses allow over 25 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. So we need to make sure we monitor the health of Julio Jones. If he's limited at all, don't be surprised if maybe he's out there in a pitch count type of role, a decoy type of role if he's not 100%, which really limits his ceiling. I think Calvin Ridley is the safer play, but just something we need to pay attention to. Now for the Saints, I think this one's pretty clear. If you have Michael Thomas, you start that guy every single week that you possibly can. He's that good, and it's going to be another great matchup for him here in Week 13. Moving on to the Sunday games, Tennessee Titans, Indianapolis Colts, and in this game, we have a case of the sits, because I don't like anybody in this game, to be completely honest. I feel like the time to trust T.Y. Hilton is gone. It is not now. We already are hearing reports that he's kind of unsure of his calf injury and how much that may limit him. Well, we saw what happened with that last week with his 3 catches for 18-yard performance and the pitch count that he was on. So who's next in line? Zach Pascal? Nope. He only saw 1 target last week. Eric Ebron? He's been moved to the IR. He's done. We know it's not going to be him. Chester Rogers, maybe, but do you want to trust Chester Rogers in week 13 of your fantasy football league? Probably not either. I mean, the Tennessee Titans are allowing 22 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, but in this game, I can see a lot more Jack motherfucking Doyle and a heavy dose of the running backs in this offense. I don't see, one wide receiver really standing out. It's going to be a mixture of them, and it's really hard for me to trust any of them at this point in time, but a lot can be said the same way for the Tennessee Titans, Corey Davis and A.J. Brown. These guys are totally boom or bust. You saw it last week with A.J. Brown. Do you expect that on a weekly basis? No, probably not. He hasn't put back-to-back games together like that at all this season, and we can't really expect him to, right? This is a team that really favors the run a lot. They're way more improved with Ryan Tannehill. Don't get me wrong. He's playing great football, throwing the ball down the field, but, I mean, these guys played each other just a few weeks ago. Actually, it was back in week 2, and they held both Corey Davis and A.J. Brown to a combined 63 total yards. I know, though, things are different. They're moving the ball down the field with Tannehill. Now, I get it. All I'm trying to say is it's too much risk, in my opinion, here. The peaks and valleys are too spread apart. Neither one of these guys have a safe floor. It's all or nothing. So unless you're trying to go out there and just absolutely, win or go home, then you're going to want to avoid Corey Davis and A.J. Brown. The upside is there. It's just too much risk. Jets and Bengals, baby. Yep, that's right. The Red Rifle himself, Andy Dalton, back under center for the Cincinnati Bengals. Not overly excited, but maybe we get some late season value out of Tyler Boyd. I mean, Tyler Boyd was wide receiver 21 the first 8 weeks of the season with Andy Dalton. Solid wide receiver 2-ish. 5 of the 8 games they played together, he had double-digit targets, so we know Dalton was looking his way. They're going up against the New York Jets, who allow over 25 fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, 8th most in the NFL. And Auden Tate is another guy that was involved in this offense at the same time. He had 5 games with at least 8 fantasy points, 3 of those games with double-digit targets. They're putting Andy Dalton back in here at quarterback because they don't want to go 0-16. They're trying to win a football game, and the only way that's really going to happen is if they continue to throw the ball down the field. They need to get Boyd. They need to get Tate involved. I'll start Tyler Boyd this week. Auden Tate, only in a deep league as a flex play at best. He's not an absolute must-start here for Week 13, but he does have more value with Dalton under center. But for the Jets, it's really just Jamison Crowder and Robbie Anderson for the most part. I mean, Anderson, he busts more than he booms, but you see what happens when he booms, and just what happened last week. The problem is you can't count on that every single week from Robbie Anderson, and right now the Cincinnati Bengals are ranked 11th in the NFL as far as fewest points allowed to opposing wide receivers. Not a bad secondary there in Cincinnati. In my opinion, Jamison Crowder is safer. A safer PPR flex this week. Yes, he had a bad week last week, but he's somebody who's usually more involved in this offense. May not put up huge yardage numbers, but could rack up some receptions here this week. What we really need, more than anything, is for the Bengals to stay in the ball game and to keep it close. That will force Sam Darnold and the Jets to have to throw for 4 quarters, and that's where we make our money with Jamison Crowder. Redskins and Panthers up now, and finally Dwayne Haskins realizes he needs to get the ball to Terry McLaurin more. Just last week, Terry McLaurin saw 12 targets, a season high. Problem is, still no touchdowns since week 6, and that hurts. He's now going to be covered by James Bradbury, the Carolina Panthers, a solid defensive back, but if the volume can stay there, he has enough skill and talent to go out there and make things happen. It may not be a huge day for Terry McLaurin, but he has some serious upside this week because we know Washington is going to have to throw the ball all 4 quarters. They're not good enough to go out there and stop almost anybody, and that offense is going to have to continue to score points and move the ball down the field. It's going to have to happen a little bit through the passing game. Kelvin Harmon has come in, started to get a few targets here and there, but he's not safe enough to start. And with Carolina allowing 24 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, Terry McLaurin is the one guy who I would flex here in Week 13. For Carolina, it's kind of just DJ Moore at this point. I mean, he continues just to be a solid wide receiver. Over the last 4 weeks of the season, he is wide receiver 4 in half-point PPR formats. Wide receiver 4 over the last 4 weeks. The guy's putting up huge numbers, 9+ targets in 6 straight games, and he's really caused some of the target volume to go away from Curtis Samuel. It's kind of hurting him a little bit. Washington allows over 22 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, and Samuel's going to be a little bit more touchdown dependent. There's a chance he finds the end zone, just doesn't see enough consistent targets to give me that warm fuzzy on the inside. In my opinion, DJ Moore, he's the guy who I want to start in Carolina. Niners and Ravens up now in what could be one of the best games of the week between two of the top teams here in the NFL. But the return of George Kittle may have eaten into the target volume of Deebo Samuel a little bit more than we would like to see. Last week, Deebo only had 2 targets. One of them he took for a long touchdown, saved his fantasy owner, so that's great. But he's not 100% healthy then, and he's still not 100% healthy, but neither is Emmanuel Sanders right now. Now, it looks like Marcus Peters is going to be matched up with Deebo Samuel on a very confident Baltimore defense who's currently top 10 against opposing wide receivers, allowing just about 20 fantasy points per game. In my opinion, the matchup and the injury concerns kind of has me going away from the San Francisco passing offense here this week. A little bit too risky for my taste. Now, for Baltimore, you have Marquise Brown, but he's going to be the main object of affection of Richard Sherman, who is currently ranked as the #1 rated defensive back on playerprofiler.com. Right now, Richard Sherman has only given up more than 60 yards in a game once this season. San Francisco as a whole only allows 17.8 fantasy points per game. Willie Snead is another option here. He had a big game last week, but he hasn't had a game yet this season in which he's had more than 4 receptions or more than 61 yards receiving. Very touchdown dependent. Hard to count on that here in week 13. I can see this game on both sides really being dominated by the tight end position and with the running games. I'm kind of going away from all the passers here, or the pass catchers here in this game. I think that somebody's going to find the end zone, but it's a crapshoot at this point, and I don't know if I'm willing to take that risk this late in the fantasy season. If you have no better option, Marquise Brown is the one guy that I would take a stab at and just hope that he can break one deep against Richard Sherman. Outside of that, all these guys have a lot of risk. Bucks and Jags up now. We're not going to be too cute here, especially with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, I know a lot of the Mike Evans owners have been disappointed the past couple weeks, looking for a lot bigger games than they've been getting. But this could be the week of Mike Evans. Jacksonville allows just over 21 fantasy points per game, and it looks like Mike Evans is going to be drawing the coverage of A.J. Boye of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Over the last 5 games, Boye has given up on average 7 receptions and 72 yards a game, including the big game last week to A.J. Brown. 4 catches for 113 yards against A.J. last week. Godwin and Evans, both of these guys are mainstays in your lineup. You saw it last week with Godwin. You can't afford to ever sit either one of these guys. The ceilings are too high no matter who the opponents are going to be. On the Jacksonville side of things, though, I mean, what do we do here? I mean, we definitely want to start people against Tampa Bay because their secondary blows. But DJ Chark, he disappointed in week 12, but there was a lot of Leonard Fournette last week. Dede Westbrook came out, had a season high in receptions. He had 8 receptions for 69 yards, but he still does not have a touchdown since week 1. He's more of a safe floor play at this point. The ceiling just isn't as high for Dede Westbrook. Chris Conley, maybe if you're in a super deep league, 14, 16 teams or so, then Chris Conley becomes an option. I think he's still a little bit too limited volume-wise to be a safer play in the regular 10 or 12-man leagues, but I expect Jacksonville to throw the ball more this week against a very porous Tampa Bay secondary. It's going to be at the point to where I'm going to start DJ Chark, and I'm going to have him ranked pretty high. Great matchup. Dede Westbrook, safer play, especially in PPR leagues, but Chris Conley is going to be somebody that I leave here in the sit column. Browns and Steelers up now, and the Cleveland offense continues to progress later and later into the season. And I get it, last week was just against the Dolphins, but you can say that at least they did what they were supposed to do against an inferior opponent. And they're starting to force the ball and get Odell Beckham more involved. He's had 30 targets over his last 3 games. But Jarvis Landry, he still remains the safer play, in my opinion, in this offense. He's had double-digit fantasy points 4 straight games. He's scored 5 touchdowns in those 4 games. He's also seen 53 targets over the last 5 weeks, which is 10 more than Odell Beckham Jr. He feels really comfortable with Baker Mayfield at this point, and he is the safer option. However, the Steelers allow over 22 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, and both Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, going to be in the start column once again. For the Steelers, man, this is tough. I mean, Devlin Hodges, he has to be better than Mason Rudolph because Mason Rudolph sucks. But how much does he really limit the ceilings of some of these players? Does Juju even play? He's barely practicing as is. There's a chance that he does not play, and if he doesn't, then James Washington becomes somebody that I would not mind starting. I mean, right now, Cleveland gives up over 20 fantasy points per game, and we've seen here in the off day of the week that Devlin Hodges and James Washington went out duck hunting together. If anything, it just shows that they're building a little bit of chemistry. Maybe if Hodges gets in some trouble and he's looking for somebody quick, he looks the way of James Washington maybe a little bit more. He's not a safe play by any means, but if Juju sits, James Washington is the only guy I'm touching here. Packers and Giants up now in a great matchup for Davante Adams here this week, where the Giants allow on average over 27 fantasy points per game, second most in the NFL. Davante Adams has had 33 targets over his last 3 games, the 3 games since he's returned from injury. But outside of Davante Adams, it's really just a bunch of running backs involved, right? You know, you have Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones. Not too much for the wide receiver position. At least that's safe enough to start on a weekly basis. But for the Giants, we have options, right? We have Darius Slayton, Golden Tate, who's currently in the concussion protocol, whether he's cleared or not. And then you have Sterling Shepard. This one, it's going to take some time to really kind of figure out because it really hinges on if Golden Tate plays or not. The Packers, they allow over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, but until we find out what happens with Tate, it really changes a lot of things. If Tate plays, all these guys are kind of low-end flex plays because they're going to eat into each other's upside. If Golden Tate is not cleared and he sits, all of a sudden Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton become somebody with some solid flex value here this week. They're going to have to throw the ball against the Packers to have any chance at winning. They have the options. It really just depends if Golden Tate plays or not. So make sure you're watching the practice reports if he is cleared. I'm kind of avoiding all of these guys for the most part. If you have no better option, I think the highest touchdown upside may go to Golden Tate. Maybe the safest floor goes to Sterling Shepard, and Darius Slayton's kind of somewhere right in the middle. But once we find out what happens with Golden Tate, we'll keep you guys updated and make a better decision there. But as of the way things sit right now, with Golden Tate not practicing, Slayton and Shepard are the 2 that I would consider here this week. Eagles and Dolphins up now, and do we have a healthy wide receiver yet for the Philadelphia Eagles? I mean, it sounds like Alshon Jeffrey is going to be back. He's back at practice. There's a chance that Nelson Aguilar plays, but who really cares? Dude has T-Rex arms and doesn't catch any balls outside of his body anyway. But the biggest question is Carson Wentz. He has a hand injury. It sounds like he's going to play, but if for some reason he sits, I'm not touching anybody for Philadelphia. We want him to play because it's a great matchup. The Dolphins give up, on average, 26.8 fantasy points per game, and this is the type of game that we want to start Alshon Jeffrey against. I expect the Eagles to come out, throw the ball early, try to get a lead, and rely on the running game late in the game to take some of the pressure off of Carson Wentz. That's what I'm looking for the Philadelphia Eagles. So Alshon Jeffrey, if Wentz is healthy, is somebody that I would look at. For the Dolphins, it's really just fantasy Bigfoot, right? Devontae Parker. He has 3 straight games with double-digit targets. 6 of the last 8 games, he's had double-digit fantasy points, so the guy's playing pretty solid. Now, Philadelphia, they allow 26.4 fantasy points per game, and we know that the Dolphins cannot run the ball. Why? Because Kalen Ballage is their running back still. They're going to have to throw. Fitzmagic looks the way of fantasy Bigfoot. I see another sighting in our future in Week 13. Rams and Cardinals up now, and the Rams have basically gone from Super Bowl contender to just not trying to finish last in the NFC West at this point. Cooper Kupp's all but empty. Brandon Cooks is out there busy flexing on his defenders after he catches a football, all 2 of them last week. But Robert Woods kind of seems like a safe option at this point in time. I mean, I would think. I mean, if this isn't the game that Cooper Kupp figures it out, though, I may be completely off this bandwagon going forward and quit giving him chances. More than likely, Woods will draw the coverage of Byron Murphy, rookie defensive back there for the Arizona Cardinals. Brandon Cooks probably gets Patrick Peterson, which may take him out of the equation for me. Robert Woods has a decent floor, especially in PPR leagues. At least he's getting the volume. Last chance for Cooper Kupp. I'll put him in the starting lineup one more time. This is a great matchup for him to go out there and put up some solid numbers. If he doesn't, he may not be in my starting lineup here, maybe rest of season. Cooks with Patrick Peterson, he's going to be a pass. He's on the sit list. Robert Woods is the one safer play at this point, I would think, here for the Los Angeles Rams. For Arizona, it's Christian Kirk, who more than likely draws Jalen Ramsey, which sucks because I love Christian Kirk. And then you have Larry Fitzgerald, who's an option in deeper leagues only. Anything over 12 teams, that's where you're starting to look at Larry Fitzgerald. The numbers have just not been consistently high there for him. He has had back-to-back good games before their bye week. Coming off the bye week, he could be rested. They could look to get him a little bit more involved this week. But if all of these running backs are healthy for the Cardinals, they're going to eat into a lot of touches, and the ceilings will definitely come down for all of the wide receivers. A name to look at here. I've been mentioning his name here off and on throughout the second half of the season. He's not ready to start yet. But Andy Isabella, Would not surprise me if that dude goes out and has a big game here this week. They're slowly working him into this offense. Dude could be putting up some big numbers here and could be a name we talk about a lot next season. Chargers and Broncos up now, and the Chargers coming off their bye week, so hopefully they're well rested, right? Hopefully Phillip Rivers is, at least. He looked horrible before the bye week. He could barely throw it down the field 30, 40 yards. He looked old before the bye week. But these teams just played each other back in week 5. Keenan Allen and Mike Williams both basically held in check, but Chris Harris of the Denver Broncos didn't even play in that game. One positive, Keenan Allen gets most of his time, at least half of his time, out of the slot, which would help him avoid Chris Harris a lot. The defensive coverage would then go to Mike Williams of Chris Harris, but the problem is now Mike Williams has popped up on the injury report. If he's limited or sits at all this weekend, Keenan Allen would move to the outside more often, drawing more coverage of Chris Harris, making his ceiling even lower. Now, if Chris Harris has been vulnerable anywhere all season long, it's been on the deep ball. That's the problem, though. Phillip Rivers can't throw it deep. At least he hasn't been able to here so far this season. Now, Keenan Allen, he's seen double-digit targets 4 out of his last 5 games, and he's the safer option that I'll put in the start column. For the Denver Broncos, it's really just Courtland Sutton, right? But this is a tough matchup for him going up against Casey Hayward of the Los Angeles Chargers. Sutton was held to just 2 catches for 18 yards in Week 5, and the Los Angeles Chargers as a whole are the number 3 defense against opposing wide receivers. So far, Casey Hayward has only had 1 game all season where he's allowed more than 75 yards receiving. If anything, Courtland Sutton is a deep league flex. I really don't trust him much this week, and I would not want to have him in my starting lineup unless I had no other options here in Week 13. Raiders and Chiefs up now, and I think we dodged a bullet on Tyreek Hill. His bye week happened at the most perfectest of times, and yes, I just made up the word perfectest because it just fits, right? We were really hoping that we wouldn't be without Tyreek Hill this late in the season, all signs pointing to him playing in a great matchup going up against the Oakland Raiders, who allow 26 fantasy points per game, 7th most in the NFL. He's an absolute must-start once again here this week. Outside of him, though, Sammy Watkins, Mecole Hardman, Demarcus Robinson, they're all too boom or bust. At this point, it's the running game, Kelsey and Hill. Outside of that, can't trust anybody here this late in the season. They're really big play touchdown dependent. Now for Oakland, I really hate to see the injury to Hunter Renfrow. The dude was like diet version of Julian Edelman in this offense. I think he was really starting to get more involved, and then he had the broken rib, the punctured lung. He's out indefinitely. Hopefully, he can come back strong next year. This is definitely a guy that could play a serious role in this offense, so it's really just Tyrell Williams at this point, and he's been struggling to say the least. Kansas City's a top 10 defense. They're only allowing 18.4 fantasy points per game, and the touchdown-dependent Tyrell Williams just isn't getting it done enough with enough volume to go out there and be a safe play. Yes, Oakland may be forced to throw the ball, but Tyrell Williams hasn't proven himself consistent enough to be that guy, to be safe enough to start here in Week 13. Patriots and Texans up now, and I think DeAndre Hopkins owners are dreading that he's having to face the New England Patriots in Week 13 of fantasy football. I mean, he's going to draw the coverage of Stephon Gilmore, and Gilmore has only allowed double digits once all year long. That was to Odell Beckham Jr. Week 8, where he only had 6 catches for 73 yards, 10 fantasy points exactly. You can't sit DeAndre Hopkins, though. Just don't be surprised if that ceiling is somewhat limited. Will Fuller is another name who looked like he was really involved in this offense, and more than anything, he looked healthy last week. If anything, the Houston Texans are going to have to throw the ball in this football game. Yes, they're going to try to open it up with the running game where New England's been vulnerable with Carlos Hyde, but they're going to have to throw. There's no way around it. Hopefully being at home motivates them a little bit better. They're used to playing there at home, and hopefully just a big play or two to Will Fuller is all you may need. If anything else, though, look at your roster here. If you already have a lot of risk, you may not want to risk it with Fuller. If you're feeling pretty good, the upside is huge for Will Fuller, and I'd throw him in my flex spot. Just depends on what your lineup looks like. Now for the Patriots, Julian Edelman, he's a weekly must-start for sure. He's just too involved, too consistent to not want him in your lineup. But after that, it's a bunch of question marks. Does Mohamed Sanu play? Does Philip Dorsett play? I mean, Houston allows 24 fantasy points per game, but we really don't know what to do here until we know more. If Sanu and Dorsett both play, that buries the value of maybe of a N'Keal Harry, Jacoby Myers. If Mohamed Sanu and Philip Dorsett sit, all of a sudden Jacoby Myers and N'Keal Harry have more upside in this offense. Another one of these games, we need to watch the practice reports. Pay attention here going into the weekend. We'll keep you guys updated because until these injuries, clarify themselves a little bit more, it's kind of a question mark here in this game. Vikings and Seahawks up Monday Night Football, and is this the return of Adam Thielen? I mean, the Seahawks give up 22 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, and Minnesota could really use him. But does that mean that we go back to the severely hit and miss Stephon Diggs that we saw at the beginning of the season? Well, don't worry or don't be too excited as of yet, because Adam Thielen popped back up on the injury report on Monday after practice with an injury scare once again to the hamstring. There's a chance he doesn't play this weekend. And with that news, I'll start Stephon Diggs now because he goes back to being the true number one wide receiver in an offense where he doesn't need to see huge volume to have a solid day. But Adam Thielen, regardless if he plays or not, I will not start him. If he does, he will be limited. They will not put him out there and have him play the entire game. He'll be somewhat limited regardless. So I'm not touching Adam Thielen in a critical week like it is here this week. But for Seattle, can we have the first 9 weeks of Tyler Lockett back? I mean, what has happened to Tyler Lockett? He's had some tough matchups here. But hopefully it's going to get a little bit easier for him here this week. It's a lot easier to throw on Minnesota than it is to run on them. So I'm looking for a bounce back for Tyler Lockett. DK Metcalf next in this offense as far as target shares go. Josh Gordon, not so much as of yet. DK has some solid flex appeal, especially in standard leagues because he's not going to see huge volume, at least huge receptions. But that big play potential, it's going to be there on a weekly basis for him. And in deeper leagues, I don't hate DK Metcalf this week, though. Josh Gordon, somebody who I'm just going to avoid in this offense as of right now. He's not involved enough, consistently enough in this throwing game to really be a consideration here, especially in Week 13 with so much on the line. All right, those are all my starts and sits for the wide receiver position here, Week 13 fantasy football. Let me know what you think down below in the comment section, and do me a favor, hit that like button for me. I hope you guys all enjoy your Thanksgiving with your families or however you are spending it. We are eternally thankful for you, Headliner Nation, for giving us this opportunity on a weekly basis. It's been a lot of fun all season, and we're looking forward to keeping it going year-round. So hopefully you have a great rest of your week, a great holiday weekend. Make sure you get some Black Friday shopping in there. Buy me a good Christmas present. Whatever it is, y'all have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you later.